So are people listening to us now? Are people listening to us? Are we on the air? Wow.
Welcome to Pearl Jam Radio's Year in Review 1992. I'm your host, The Rob, and we're now taking a glance back 25 years to a time where everything surrounding and involving Pearl Jam was on a continually expansive and rather frenetic pace forward. With their debut album 10 stoking the fires, their energetic concerts would be seen by fans in the smallest of clubs to the largest of festivals, exposing Pearl Jam to an ever-growing fan base. We'll take you through 1992 and all the historic highlights that shot Pearl Jam to the top of the charts and deep into the hearts of...
Hi everybody, it's Chuck from Above the Basement, Boston Music and Conversation. As you may know, we are always amazed how there seems to be just 2 degrees of separation between people. In our conversation with Austin's Darden Smith last year, we covered some of the history of Americana. Recently, Ronnie was on a call with Mr. Smith, who highly recommended getting in touch with Rob Bleetstein, who we shall learn had co-coined the term Americana in the 90s. Rob has been a connoisseur of several genres of music since he was a kid, and they all share one common thread: culture. He entered the radio world with guns blazing, becoming an archivist for New Riders of the Purple Sage. In recent years, he became producer of Pearl Jam Radio while sharing his ongoing expertise as host of Grateful Dead Radio, both on SiriusXM satellite radio. Ronnie mentioned to his brother-in-law Cory that Mr. Bleetstein would be a guest on ATB, and Cory, being a Pearl Jam superfan, simply stated, "Wow, you're going to talk to the Rob." That certainly set our expectations high for this conversation. Rob highlighted his love for the live experience and how the common thread of music fandom culture transcends genres. He also gave us a perspective on just how important Pearl Jam fans are to the musicians and how the fans in return emulate their missions and causes. So here is our conversation with Rob Bleetstein, recorded at an undisclosed location in Boston, Massachusetts. Bill Janovitz went up and played.
Yeah, that was actually great.
From Buffalo Tom.
One of the highlights of last night.
Yeah, I was psyched to see you went up on stage. Buffalo Tom just came out with another album, too.
He was just on Mark Maron, too.
That's right. He was. Because Mark knew him when he went to BU.
So where's the basement?
I don't know if this place actually has a basement.
This is the farthest above the basement we've been. It's pretty...
That's not true. Mickey Hart was way, way up.
Oh, that's a good point.
So do I have to get really close like I do on my mic at home, or are you in Pro Tools?
Yeah, just Pro Tools.
Okay.
And then I just got a little Tascam thing there from my 4.
Okay.
Pretty simple. We did one recently where the whole thing just crashed, and then I had to somehow find the files.
Whole radio thing just crashed. I had to have someone just go into my house and reboot my Mac Mini to get my radio station back up.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Happens every once in a while. It didn't happen the 6 weeks I was in Europe, thank God.
And you just got back from Europe?
Yeah.
You happened to interview a guy who wrote Pearl Jam here in Boston.
Here, yeah.
Well, from
Denmark.
From Denmark.
Right.
Yeah. Is that how you met him when you were overseas?
No, they just reached out to me. I never even heard of him before. Which is really crazy that we never met, because we've been to so many of the same places over the years and know a lot of the same people. And he's got ties to the band, and he connected the band with a lot of the families from the Roskilde tragedy. I don't know if you know about that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it was pretty intense. He wrote a good book.
What's it called?
Pearl Jam. The more you need, the less you get, which is so true.
And you're just in Boston for the Fenway gig.
Yeah.
You know Boston very well?
I have some great Boston stories.
Yeah?
What was the first show you ever saw here?
That one I sent you, the Grateful Dead at Boston Music Hall, November 13th and 14th, 1978. And then my second time in Boston was in 91 for the Boston Garden shows at the Old Garden. Yeah. And I come in and I hand the guy my ticket, and he's like an older guy, probably worked at the Garden since the day it opened.
Probably a Garden guy.
And I go, hey, can I please have the big half of the ticket stub? I collect them. He proceeds to rip off the tiniest little end that says like section, row, seat, and hands it to me and goes, welcome to Boston.
Oh, really?
And I'm just like, living up to the reputation here. Do I have New York written all over me or what? I was like...
That's too bad.
But fun. The shows have always been good. And also, I work with New Riders of the Purple Sage, and I've been their archivist. And this is really interesting. One of my favorite tapes I ever had as a kid growing up was from Boston Music Hall, December 5th, 1972. And then when I got to know the band later and become their archivist, and I'm getting the tapes and going through stuff, and there's the master reels of that show.
Oh, really?
And I'm like, oh my, and it sounds amazing. So that's like one of the first things I put
Where's
out.
the Boston Music Hall?
Yeah, we should probably look that up. We should know that ourselves.
Because that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, it turned into something else called like maybe some kind of opera house or Tremont something.
Oh, was it on Tremont Street down in the theater district?
Yeah.
Oh, it probably it was the Boston Opera House. I'm not sure.
It could be the Boston Opera House or the Wayne Center or something.
Hannah, can you look that up for us?
Great place. Yeah. And Dead played there a lot.
You mentioned Riders, so I've always heard of them growing up in the late 70s, 80s. I definitely can relate to a lot of stuff that you feel with music. I didn't go to nearly as many shows and dive into it in that way, but I remember hearing a lot about them. After I looked up some info on Rob Bleetstein, I wanted to dive into them a little bit more, and it sounds like they really hit a nerve when you were 10.
They did. It was the first pedal steel guitar I ever heard.
Right, yeah. That's what
was
it the pedal steel you think that did it?
Yeah, it was absolutely the pedal steel that did it, because I was like, what is that? And I don't know what that is, but I'm going where that's taking me.
And you remember being... My daughter's 10. We talk about music sometimes, and they can get it at a young age, but that to me says a lot. You knew pretty early on.
Matter of fact, my best friend who I growing up, he lives in Vermont now, and I took him to the concert last night, and it was at his house, in his room, and it was his older sister's albums that we were listening to. And I think also another part of it is she had pictures of them up on her wall, and they were these long-haired, dope-smoking hippies, and I was like, that's my future.
And that was kind of the catalyst, it sounds like, for further movement into music in your life. Or
absolutely, yeah. I think I was addicted to records like when I was like 4 or 5 years old. I think I remember like from my 5th birthday, I got my first like record player. I mean, I was definitely into the Beatles. I still have my Apple 45s.
Is this through your parents that you got this music?
Yeah. I mean, my parents were into like Barbra Streisand and other stuff, and not rock and roll. They were of the age where they could have been into Elvis, but they weren't.
Yeah.
But they were into music.
Definitely into music, yeah. Definitely into the Beatles. My mom was definitely into the Beatles. I know that. Yeah, and I still have those 45s. Had to be like 68, 69 those years.
Yeah, I got all my aunt's old Beatle records, and they were the original records. My mom threw them all out.
We never talked about this. I had a very similar story with my dad. Yeah. They were moving from New York to the east.
It's not an uncommon story, I'm sure, where we all moved out of our houses to go to college, and then we left our records behind because
they become kind of obsolete, and then you realize they're just not.
My thing was when I first saw San Francisco when I was 11, and I knew then, it was like, I'm so out of there, I'm so moving here. And it was just a way to do it. When I did move, and then I was already in California.
Wait, sorry, out of where?
Long Island. So I was already living there for 3 years, and then my mom sold the house in Long Island, moved to the city, and then it was like, do you want to come back and get anything? And I was like, no. And then my regret a year later was like, I had this big round tin Yankees garbage can that was filled with baseball cards. Oh,
you had like Mickey Mantle and all.
Well, it was really weird. Like, I definitely have probably a couple of $1,000 worth of stuff in there.
They have to become rare. So you had to throw all these baseball cards out for them to become rare. So you just helped the process, I guess.
So last night, you're at Fenway Park. Baseball is not the focus for the night, but it's Pearl Jam. It's the first of 2 shows here in Boston, right? You said you've seen some shows in Fenway.
Only Pearl Jam.
Oh, only Pearl Jam. Okay.
Yeah, only Pearl Jam.
How many times have they played here?
This is their second time. They were here in 2016 for 2 nights.
Yeah. Have you been to other ballparks like this for music?
Yeah. Sure. I'm not the fan of music in stadiums, but I get it. It's a way of reaching a lot of people. They definitely tie in the baseball thing. I mean, Ed's got the thing with the Cubs. You've probably seen that Last Play 2 movie. That was, incredible, how that whole thing happened with them winning the series that year and them playing Wrigley. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Pearl Jam episode at Wrigley in 2013. The first time they played there, it's been a dream of Ed's probably his whole life to play Wrigley Field where he grew up. I think that's him now. At that event, it was one night, we did a Sirius broadcast. We didn't broadcast a show, but I did a live thing for 2 hours outside. It was like 110 degrees and 100% humidity. It was just a torturous day.
Like today.
But it was great. And then everybody's inside. The show starts. We're like 7 or 8 songs into the show.
and security comes on the stage and says, all right, there's a big lightning storm approaching. We have to evacuate the stadium. 2.5 hour delay. There was a lot of wrangling with a lot of people. I know the mayor got involved, and I don't know how they did it, but they came back on at 11:30 and played to 2 in the morning.
Wow.
And when that show ended, that Wrigley Field scoreboard clock was at 2 a.m., and it was something else. It was just...
Wow. I mean, if they did that in Boston, they'd have to keep the subway closes at 1 here, so they'd have to keep that open.
But, yeah, and that's the thing. Both of these historic parks are dead smack in these neighborhoods, so it's like...
Well, and it's funny because the Cubs and Sox... that connection's interesting with the underdog that for 100 years or so, they didn't win. But the connection with Eddie and the foundation to be named later, that's the thing
Theo.
with Peter Gammons, and he's done a lot of work
Theo Epstein too,
with
right?
Theo, yeah. I think he's performed a few times in Chicago and Boston, even at small clubs here at the Paradise. So it's kind of a neat connection.
It's also kind of crazy how Theo Epstein has been involved with these two clubs.
He won them both their championships. Yeah.
No, exactly.
It's crazy.
He's a baseball god to Boston and Chicago.
And he plays guitar.
He does play the guitar, along with Peter Gammons. Backing up here, the inspiration you got from going to see those bands when you were 10 didn't turn you into a musician, or did it? Are you a musician? Do you play something?
Yeah, but not...
But it wasn't your thing. What it did was turn you into a radio guy.
Well, I'm a music junkie that I love to play guitar, and I like playing pedal steel guitar, as horrible as I might be. But I realized that, being on the stage is not my thing.
Oh, okay.
So I've always knew that going into it from some other angle. But yeah, radio was always a huge part of my life. And growing up in the 70s in New York with both WLIR and WNEW were huge parts of my life. And there was that whole East Coast connection with BCN here.
Yeah, definitely.
And MMR in Philly and CMF in Rochester. There was just that whole string of them. And
CMF. That was where I grew up, in Rochester, New York, with Brother Weeze.
Yeah. And so, there would be simulcasts, and they, a bunch of them would carry them. So you'd be hearing these call letters from these other cities, and then, you're in high school or college and you're traveling around to Dead shows, and then you're hearing these stations. And first time I came to Boston and for those music hall shows, and we're staying at a friend's older brother's dorm, sleeping on his floor, and Mickey and Bobby are in BCN, and we're taping it on, we're plugging our tape decks into his receiver and taping that. And
this was the social media of that
generation.
Yeah. We had a high school radio station, WIQH, in Concord. And several of those kids back then who are, graduated with me, they're still in radio. It's like once it gets in your blood, it's for whatever reason, it's like they're professional DJs. They're not still.
Yeah. Well, that's true. And now things have changed in radio. I want to hear about that. You started in 85. Is that right?
Yeah, but
first radio gig?
In high school in New York, I knew that that's what I wanted to do, and I got an internship at New York Tech University, and the guy who I was under was Bob Cranes, who became a big DJ at BCN. So I started doing college radio at San Jose State, and then from there, I was working at a record store. Then I got my first radio gig in 85, when I was out of college.
And what were you doing on that radio gig? Was it analysis at all? Were you having commentary, or was it you're spinning songs and you're going to the next?
I've been blessed. So in the late 70s and early 80s, there was a station called KFAT in Gilroy, California, which was a bunch of hippies playing country music and Grateful Dead and Rolling Stones. And you'd hear George Jones into the Stones, into Eric Clapton, into the Dead, and all this other stuff. So that turned me on to this whole other world of stuff. And I was actually getting tapes of KFAT sent to me in New York in high school. That station was a lifestyle. If you listened to that station, you were a fathead. They would do their own concerts called Fat Fries, did broadcasts all the time too. And that was another huge thing. It's especially LIR had the Tuesday night concert series from this club called My Father's Place in Roslyn, the town I grew up in. NEW would always broadcast things like the Dead shows from the Capitol Theater or everywhere. Just all this stuff. All these bands would always play, and they'd always be broadcast. So the taper collector mentality started super young, and it was always trading tapes. And that was the real social media, the whole tape trading thing of the underground Dead tape trading world, which led me to trading tapes with people on the West Coast who became some of my best friends. I mean, like one person who I consider my total brother in the world to this day, I met when I was 15 through trading dead tapes in the mail and putting an ad in Dead Relics magazine.
Greetings from the hallowed intersection of Post and Steiner Streets in San Francisco. I'm Rob Bleetstein, and I'll be your guide for this journey back to the Winterland Ballroom and one of the Dead's more legendary performances, this one known as Thursday Night at Winterland, December 29th, 1977. This magical evening is filled with the raw, blistering arena rock and roll sound that the band had been fine-tuning all year long in 1977, as well as some of the most tranquil and psychedelic passages they've ever laid down. It was also my first night ever in Winterland, and the impressions left on this then 16-year-old mind still linger on all these years later. The power the music created on 12/29/77 has not only withstood the passage of time, but has been immortalized as a CD release.
Yeah, that really is that grassroots web that was connected to the fans through tapes. You really met a brotherhood of people that shared the same love, but at the same time, there was that tangible sharing of things, which kind of made it, I think, that was pre-email.
Yeah, it was pre-everything, and that was it too. It was like, and you met people at the shows, and you couldn't get your tape deck in, you could patch into someone that night, or you would at least hook up with them, and they would send you a copy the next day or something like that. And
were you one of the guys that had the high quality microphone recording devices?
I had a tape. Yeah, I did a bunch of masters for a while. I didn't invest in microphones. That was the thing. You'd bring your deck in, and you'd get the patch out of someone that you met and knew, and going out of their mics.
Those were the sick tapes.
I did do a few. Like when I got my Sony 158, which was a really big unit, and compared to, it's like the size of your MacBook right there, actually, but a lot heavier. The first thing I ever recorded with that was Neil Young, Rust Never Sleeps at Madison Square Garden. I had my own microphones for that.
But now you can't even bring that stuff in. It's just a whole.
It was a whole other. It was just a whole other world, you know. It was like,
I don't know what the Dead do now, but I know they had an open tape. They would tape
the Dead like went along with it, and then it became such a humongous thing that they had to set up a section and sold tickets for taper sections.
Right.
But by that time, I was out of it. You know, I didn't last too long as a actual taper. You know, but then I became a taper. Once I was sort of in a more professional world and knowing bands and knowing road crews and stuff, it was like, patch me into the board. I don't want an audience tape. I want the board feed.
You're like, I graduated to the board
I graduated to the board, yeah. And then I did that for a long, long time into the whole DAT era, and that used to be like a total obsession and thing. And then I'm like, I don't think I care anymore. Although I have been talked into a few things. There have been a few events where I'm able to go and no one else was able to get in, and none of the tapers could get in, and they're like, dude, you have to do it.
It's kind of come full circle a little bit because of Sirius Satellite. I mean, we were listening, there was a Bogota, Colombia Pearl Jam that we listened to on the way in, and then there was another one that was in Seattle, Washington. So that's the thing now, between whether you're on the Dead channel, the Pearl Jam channel, there's a DMB channel now.
The good thing with both the Dead and Pearl Jam, which makes a channel really doable, is that you have two bands that, number one, never play the same show twice, right, and officially release their stuff. So you have this incredible archive of great sounding material.
Now, those are the two shows you're currently producing and started as producer.
Yeah, I produce the concerts on the Grateful Dead channel and produce concerts and specials and host and do other things on the Pearl Jam channel.
Is that sort of like a rolling thing where you have a great show in mind and you put together some type of like master playlist?
Both channels on Sirius play 7 concerts a week. Each one gets aired 3 times a week. Right. Over a certain time slot. So my thing is to host those shows and talk about those shows, introduce them.
I know you do a lot of traveling. You're right here with us in Boston. When we were talking over Facebook, you were out in Europe. Do you incorporate the physical presence of you being there to your dialogue?
Absolutely. And especially on the Dead thing, it's like if I'm talking about a concert that I was at in the days. Like today is the 41st anniversary of Englishtown, New Jersey, which was my Woodstock, basically.
For the Dead.
For my life. I mean, it was 150,000 people in a field in New Jersey. It was the New Riders, Marshall Tucker, and the Dead. It was 100 degrees. I was 15 years old. I went with a bunch of friends. We went a day and a half early, and the amount of illicit and non-illicit substances that were taken by everybody there. And
your memory is amazing.
Yeah, I don't know.
41 years today. Huh?
That I can talk about. What happened 20 minutes ago, good luck.
I remember my first Dead show. It was this year.
We went to Dead and Company.
That's not a Dead show.
Yeah, it isn't exactly.
It's not a Dead show. I know it's not
so
a Dead
the
show,
culture
still,
and that's one thing we want to talk about is that there's something, we all know that Dead and Company is a different entity. And there's been so many different, iterations of the Dead since the 60s and 70s. But there's something about that culture in the parking lot that never changes.
It's the spirit. Again, it's sort of the lifestyle. I think the quote came from Garcia that, you can't run away with the circus anymore. So this is like the last vestige of that. And I think for these other newer generations that it's still true.
You thought I'd be surprised at the party that was going on outside. And I wasn't so surprised.
I don't know about party, but it's not a different type of tailgating. You can't even call it that. It's
Well, I mean,
the merchandise that people
food
that want to see each other, and there's a lot of love.
They create a little town there almost.
Yeah, there's a little love town.
They call it Shakedown Street, and it's a good vibe. That's part of what killed the Grateful Dead scene, the late '80s, early '90s, when that became so big, and you had more people showing up to sell drugs and do things in the parking lot, and have no interest of even going to the concert or being at the concert, and didn't have tickets for the concert. That kind of destroyed the whole thing.
There's a legal issue there, yeah.
Right in the early '90s was coincidentally right when Phish started to blast off. Mm-hmm. I remember going to Phish when they first started, and when they were first getting big in '89 at University of Vermont in Burlington. They seemed to sort of take on some of the Grateful Dead
absolutely
people. Some of the people that followed the Dead were now adopted almost by the Phish world.
I think a little bit of that. I think they've done pretty good of getting their own world going, for sure.
Well, that's true.
I think, there's without a doubt, there's a certain element of Dead fans who are Phish fans.
The reason I bring that up is I didn't realize when you just said that in the early 90s, the bubble could have bursted for the Dead. And it's just kind of coincidence almost that Phish was there to take.
Well, it did. I mean, you had the band guys needed to send out a letter to the Deadheads saying, "Look, you need to chill out, and you can't do this in the parking lot." And so, and Garcia famously was like, "I'm not signing no fucking letter. You send out a letter. I'm not signing no."
Where did they send the letters?
To all they had a huge mailing list.
Okay,
and,
like a physical mailing list.
Yeah,
they put a stamp on it.
Yeah.
Around that time, late 80s, early 90s, this is when Pearl Jam came in, and now they kind of have the same...
It's interesting because between those two bands, there's a bunch of similarities and a bunch of non-similarities. There's not really a similarity in the music, but there's a similarity in the symbiosis between them and the fans, and what goes on, what happens between the stage and the fans on certain given nights, just like at a Dead show. They're their own unit. They do what they want. They're very insular. They've got their world taken care of. They're not particularly too open to certain outside influences, just like the Dead. They've got a crew that's been with them forever, just like the Dead. And there was a certain amount of Deadheads that did get into Pearl, that are into Pearl Jam, and then a certain amount that aren't. Like, I turn a lot of my friends onto it, and they can handle some of the acoustic sides, but they can't handle the punk rock stuff at all. It works for some people, and it doesn't work for others.
Well, it's so interesting, the Venn diagram you can picture there. Like, who are the people that actually genuinely love both? But the fact is that you can not like the other music, but still appreciate the fact that there's a similar culture.
People have said, the way that both of them do their business is sort of similar, but I've always had a problem with that whole thing of the Grateful Dead, created this way of doing business and stuff. I'm like, they were always broke as far as I knew. It's like, I don't know. Until the very end when they were the highest grossing band in the last couple of years, but I don't know. They had money and they would blow it all and go to Egypt and do great things like that.
That documentary, there was a recent documentary, is pretty big.
Let's Play 2 or Pearl Jam 20?
Pearl Jam 20.
Yeah,
so I saw that, and it really astounded me, the passion of the fans.
What I love about that movie is yeah, you don't even have to know anything about the band or like the band at all, but you can't watch that movie and not love those guys for what they've been through and how they deal with things and how they persevere and all of it.
My brother-in-law Cory and my sister Laura have been really big Pearl Jam fans. They see shows every year. So brother-in-law Cory, he's a big fan of yours.
You call him brother-in-law Cory?
Yeah. Can you call him the Cory for us?
The Cory? That's right. You're the Rob, aren't you?
All right, the Cory. Here's
a whole other story.
Here's a question. Talk about how the fans and the impact of Pearl Jam fans that they may have on the band.
Well, I think it's that symbiosis, that synergy on certain nights. Like this happened in Seattle on the second night in Seattle a few weeks ago, where just from the first note, man, there was just an energy in that. And then you're in Safeco Field. There's 47,000 people. And somehow there's this energy and this intimacy that is overriding everything. And it's like everything is perfect. And the crowd's on fire. The band is on fire. And there's those nights where they're really feeding off each other. And that's the thing. That's why you keep going back. That's why you keep going back every night. You want that again.
And what about in the touring and the album, the writing, what they do off stage? Do we know what kind of impact their fans have on the band as a unit, as its own company?
Well, I think what the band really loves from the fans more than anything is how the fans have taken on the band's activism role. Like the band is very socially and politically active in causes that are close to them and always have been. They have their Vitology Foundation, but they've been doing benefits since day one for pro-choice, Tibetan freedom, youth cares, all these kinds of movements that, Vote for Change, all these things over the years that they've been involved in. And Mike Mccready has Crohn's, and he's very involved in the Crohn's and Colitis Association.
He's a lead guitarist.
Lead guitarist,
right?
yeah. And Stone Gossard is involved in a lot of environmental issues in Seattle and Washington State and across the globe. And Eddie and his wife Jill are involved in this EB Foundation, which is this really horrible skin disease that it's just like one of the most brutal things you've ever. Jeff Amen, the bass player, he builds skate parks all over the country in some Native American properties up in Montana, and they're all doing great things. And the fans have taken that on. There's a fan-run organization called the Wishlist Foundation that holds these pre-parties before every concert. They've raised over $1 million. And then what the band just did with these home shows in Seattle, these 2 shows at Safeco Field were labeled the home shows, where these are called the away shows, all these stadium shows. They got together with a lot of big and small businesses and philanthropic people in Seattle and raised over $11 million for homelessness in Seattle with those 2 concerts. And there was a Pearl Jam branded beer, bourbon, chocolate, all this stuff, and all these companies. And there was a day on August 8th where all these restaurants around Seattle were giving 10% of their proceeds to the movement. Some of the fans who were sleeping out online were raising money just there from people walking by and giving it to organizations. And it's like just everybody getting involved. I think that is what the fans do that affects the band more than anything.
Thank you, the Cory, for asking that question.
And that's another symbolic thing between the Dead and Pearl Jam, with the Dead with their Rex Foundation and the benefits that they always did over the years, that both these bands have that wing going as well.
I want to get back to satellite radio. Were you in on it very, very early to do the band-based station?
I got in as a producer, host on the Grateful Dead channel.
So the channel already existed?
When the channel started.
Had just started.
You were hired as producer in, 2007?
As one of them, yeah.
That's really kind of a different tack on radio, doing a band-based...
I approached Pearl Jam's management about doing a all Pearl Jam channel on the internet in 2006, because I was working for another internet radio company at the time doing an Americana channel. I was doing a Grateful Dead channel on that, and then I was doing a Bluegrass channel, and I was doing all these channels, and I was like, I want to do a Pearl Jam channel. And then I reached out to the band and said, well, I need your blessing to do this. And they were like, well, go ahead. And I was like, all right, well, that'd be a lot of work, and this company really does not deserve a Pearl Jam channel. And then that company went under.
Did that plant the seed for the Sirius Pearl Jam?
Well, here's the deal with that. When I got laid off from that internet company that I was working for, doing 5 channels at the time, in the beginning of 2009, I was like, okay, what's next? got to work for Pearl Jam somehow. How am I going to make this happen? They're a band that has everything and doesn't need anything, but they don't have a radio station on their website. That's what they need, and that's what I could do for them. So I pitched it to them and
To Pearl Jam.
Yeah, to Pearl Jam directly, and they liked the idea, but they were like, well, it's not really a priority, but let's just keep talking about it because it's a good idea, and then if it ever does happen, you're definitely the guy to do it. I'm like, okay, cool. It took a year, and we figured out a way to make it work. So I launched Pearl Jam Radio on the band's website, on pearljam.com, in May of 2010, the day their spring tour started in Kansas City. So I did that whole spring tour, was doing tour reports from that, and programming it every day from that. And then it was 6 months later, Pearl Jam told me that Sirius was interested in doing a channel. And I was like, well, cool. I already worked there part-time, so I should be building that channel
But you
for
didn't
them.
hear that through Sirius? You heard it through Pearl Jam?
Sirius had reached out to Pearl Jam saying, we want to do a channel.
And they said, well, we got a guy named Rob that's already doing this.
We got a guy named Rob who already works for you on your Grateful Dead channel, and
boom. I wanted to ask about... Oh, no, I know what I want to mention. Darden Smith was the guy that connected me to you.
Right.
That's why we're sitting here. And cheers to Darden.
Thank you, Darden.
Yeah.
How do you know Darden?
You met him as
I think
a
he
fan
might have
when
been,
he was performing?
Yeah,
type of
I
thing?
think he might have been opening for like Nancy Griffith or Robert Earl Keen or somebody coming
probably.
through town,
Sounds
and
right.
saw him open up, and then I think he had I think he was on Columbia at the time.
He just came out with a book.
He just came out with a book, yeah.
What was the name of it? The Art of
Listening.
Art of Listening.
I think.
No. Art of
Not listening? No.
Art of Confusion.
Sorry, Darden.
I'll find
But
it.
anyway, I had the full circle was interesting because I just was talking to him the other day. We're working on a project, Songwriting with Soldiers.
He told me all about that, and I'm
which is
trying.
awesome.
Ed has a connection with that too, and somehow they've got to somehow meet somehow.
Yeah, let's try to do that. I'm working on a study now looking at veterans with Darden and a guy named James House, who's a singer-songwriter.
Yeah.
You know
I'm familiar
James?
with him, yeah.
He has a brand new album out now. He's awesome. And so both of them, they're going to work with veterans here at Mass General at MGH. And we're going to look at pre and post how they do like a little pilot study to see how they do with PTSD, with the songwriting. So call Eddie, see if he wants to be involved.
Yeah, it's
that's
not only
cool. I
Darden,
didn't know
it's
that.
also Mary Gaucher. You know Mary Gaucher?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We talked to her as well.
Yeah, she's great.
She's great.
So many good ones. And that's just it. That world is, that's been my world. Like, okay, it was another time in my life where I was like, I'm at a point where I'm at a crossroads. I need a gig. What am I going to do? My jobs aren't in the paper or on Craigslist. They just need to be created. So that was a whole other thing. It was at that point in time where I'd been involved with all these people for all these years in alt country, progressive country, whatever you want to call it, good country. And at that point in the 90s, it was all about Garth Brooks and Shania Twain, who were taking over the world, and Emmylou and Willie and Johnny Cash and Waylon couldn't get played on the radio anymore, and then people like Lucinda and Robert Earl Keen and Joe Ely and Jim Lauderdale and all these other people couldn't get arrested anywhere, but they'd get played on the public radio stations all over the country, and they'd be playing the coffee houses and they'd be playing the bluegrass festivals. So they had followings, they were making great records, they were critically acclaimed, but they had no radio home. Rock has multi-formats, jazz has multi-formats, classical has Why can't country have one other goddamn format?
Yeah.
It's like, come on.
Yeah.
And at that point in 1994, I was like, I could not use the word alternative.
Yeah.
That was a station Pearl Jam was played on,
Yeah.
But it was just at that point, I was like, I cannot call this chart the alternative country chart. It just can't be called that.
Yeah.
And actually, I reached out to Peter Rowan, who I've been seeing since I was 13, known forever. And I was like, hey, man, can I steal your crucial country term? So I walked into the Gavin Report, which is a trade magazine in San Francisco.
Crucial country.
And I said, hey, let's have a crucial country chart as an alternative thing. And they're like, we like that idea, but that name won't work at all because that means the other country is not. I go, yeah, exactly. And they're like, well,
That's my point.
We rely on advertising from those people, so that's not really going to fly. So
Then,
we were looking for
Then we'll
another,
open inconsequential country.
so we were looking for a name of it, and I was working with a fellow named John Grimson at the time who was working at Warner Brothers Nashville, and he was leaving that gig there to go do promotion on his own, and he was using the term Americana, And at K-Hip, first radio station I worked at was called K-Hip, which was all the DJs from K-Fat after K-Fat went under. At K-Hip, our tag was American Music, which we stole from the Blasters, from their song, Dave Alvin's song, American Music. So I was like, okay, Americana, American music, that sort of works. But at first I was really turned off of it because I was like, Americana, that makes me think of Ethan Allen Furniture. And then I spent another night thinking about it in terms of music only. Well, it means nothing in terms of music, so that's kind of great. That gives us a chance to
because it could be a word, like a genre in and of itself.
Yeah.
Are you trying to tell us you coined the phrase Americana? Is that what you're trying to say?
I share it with John Grimson,
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
You co-coined.
Co-coined?
Well, yeah. What I love about it is, this whole thing has morphed into this, this Americana Music Association. There's now this amazing conference, Americana Fest, that happens in Nashville. My intention, the whole thing of it was to create an alternative country format that you could be in your car anywhere in the country and be able to hear this music. That was it. And the other motivation really was just for me to promote my friends, Robert Earl Keenan, Lucinda Williams, and Emmy Lou, and the people I love. But yeah, so it's morphed into this whole other thing, which is fantastic.
You brought up Rodney Crowell. I heard him play a couple songs live in Nashville. My mouth just dropped. I was like, they're unbelievable songs.
Oh my God, Rodney and Guy Clark and Towns Van Zandt, and
have you heard
those
him,
guys.
Rodney Crowell?
I've heard the name, but I couldn't tell you.
I gotta say, Austin City Limits changed my life when I was 14 or something, watching on Channel 13 in New York. And the first one I ever saw was Guy Clark. I saw him do the song Last Gunfighter Ballad, and my 14-year-old jaw is just on the floor in my living room in New York, and this guy's unbelievable. I think I latched onto all this stuff because it was so foreign from a New York experience. I'm going where that is.
On your radio shows, do you have a voice to sort of be advocates and recommend different maybe diamonds in the rough that some new generation may not have heard of?
I think I need to create that. That's like the next. The two eyes, the Dead and the Pearl Jam eyes are currently active. The Americana eye needs to get something new going.
Back to Fenway and Bill Janovitz, who's a local guy that Chuck was mentioning, was on the stage last night. Does Pearl Jam do that in a lot of different towns? Is that rare? Where they have surprises and they bring people up like that?
It's happened here and there over the years, for sure. Brandy Carlisle came out in Seattle, which is great. Her and Mike Mccready are really tight, and they just recorded her song again today. So Sting came out with them 2 years ago at Madison Square Garden.
Really?
Totally unannounced.
What did they sing?
Pearl Jam have been covering Driven to Tears since 2003.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I would love to see that.
But this is great. They just start the song, don't even announce it. He just walks out mid-song, grabs the mic, does like the second verse, kills it, and then just like drops the mic and walks off while the song's still going. I'm like, that's like the most rock and roll thing Sting has done since the Police broke up.
You said there was a long story behind it. Maybe you can give us a short version. Why do they call you the Rob?
Oh, God.
Is that something you would want to talk about?
I might regret it at this point in time, the name, but all right.
Come on, the Cory wants to know.
So does the Ron and the Chuck. I didn't even think the Michelle wants to know. Where's the Hannah?
All right. It has to do with some agriculture in Northern California.
Yeah.
Where 10 years ago, I provided some seedlings to a certain individual, and this really beautiful, crazy indica bush came out of the ground. That certain farmer called that bush the Rob.
The Rob.
So, and then in 2008, on the Pearl Jam tour, my young friend Zach Newman was working for Spin Magazine doing a little video log on the Pearl Jam tour where he was covering the tour for Spin, and so he's calling me the Rob on that thing. So
it came together.
Sort of started there. So when I started the Pearl Jam radio channel on PearlJam.com, I was like, oh Christ, what am I? My whole career has been just a string of really bad radio names.
Like what?
Well, I should have stuck with the one that I had in college, my first one, which was Rob Burns, which was another weed reference. I've been, my life is just one big weed reference after the next.
It was like a verb. Your last name was a verb.
Yeah, so I called up Zach, and I was like, dude, what am I calling myself on this thing? It's like
for Pearl Jam Radio.
Yeah, for Pearl Jam Radio.
Yeah.
He goes, "You're the motherfucking Rob. What else?" I'm like, So I was like, okay. And I went with it. And there it is. Now, so now I'm stuck with it. And it was interesting, too, because when I started on the Dead channel on Sirius, I was like, well, what do you want me to refer to myself as? They're like, well, use your name because you're known in the world and community as who you are.
You mean your full name or the Rob?
Yeah, my long Jewish name. Yeah, but the interesting thing is now, like, there's so many musicians. None of them use their last names. Like, everyone's using their first and middle names, and their middle name is their last name. I guess that's popular in radio, too,
Enjoy the show tomorrow night.
I wish you were coming.
I know, me too, but...
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Nice to see you in Boston. You going to come back soon?
Good to be here, man. If I don't OD on lobster,
I don't eat lobster. I'm not a lobster guy.
Oh, my God.
I know.
Have you had a lot since you've been here?
Yeah.
All right, well, cheers to lobster and you being here in Boston. I'm going to try to find you tomorrow.
As Tenacious D would say, you're going to get your ass blown out.
Well, that's a great image. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we sign off, why don't we give him a proper radio send-off? Here he is on the job back home at SiriusXM.
That was the beautiful and highly emotional Comeback, a track that Ed Vedder wrote in tribute to his very close friend Johnny Ramone upon his passing in 2004, and a song that continues to serve as a touchstone for dealing with loss. And just as Pearl Jam's Avocado album opens up with a heavy punch, the album closes out with an equally as heavy emotional wallop as Comeback is followed up with Inside Job. One of the greatest and most hopeful songs you may ever come across, this is guitarist Mike Mccready's absolute gem. Mike wrote the music and the words to Inside Job and reveals his lyric writer side, which until this point many fans had no idea existed. Mike's song has inspired so many, and you can bet those lyrics are tattooed on many fans as well. Here's Mike Mccready on writing Inside Job.
Inside Job was written, it was before that record, the Avocado record, before we were doing that, obviously, and when we were on tour, when we were actually in South America, we had written the music, there was a demo for it, and Ed didn't have time to come up with lyrics for it. And so when we were in South America, in fact, Sao Paulo, Brazil, I really wanted that song to happen, so I just wrote some lyrics out and tried to sing them myself, and just some stuff that I was feeling at the time, and I brought him up to him to his room, and he was like, "Whoa, thanks, man. This is." I remember he said something like, "It's like you gave me an extra helping of dinner or something." I can't remember. It was some kind of allusion to dinner, and so he liked the lyrics, and he changed one thing around, and it was more out of kind of like, I want this song to happen, so I'm going to write the lyrics for it right now. And I was real nervous about it because I've never really, I wrote some lyrics for Rockfords a long time ago, but this one I actually sat down and played and sang to him to Ed while showing him the lyrics. And so then he took them and we did it later on. So it kind of came out of more of an act of desperation than anything else. Like, I really want that song to happen because I felt like I had a vision for it. And
we would like to thank the Rob for joining us and for his wonderful conversation. You can check out both of his shows and learn more about them at SiriusXM.com/Pearl Jam Radio and SiriusXM.com/Grateful Dead. Have a listen if you have not already. Go to AboveTheBasement.com. You can join us on Patreon, sign up for our newsletter, listen and subscribe to our podcast, like our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter, and look at all the nice pictures we post on Instagram. We are everywhere. On behalf of Ronnie and myself, thanks for listening. Tell your friends, and remember, Boston music, like its history, is unique. How would you like to join us in creating great conversations that inspire and connect? Patreon is a membership platform that provides a way for creators like us to build relationships and provide exclusive experiences to subscribers or patrons. We have been self-financed since we got off the ground in June of 2016, but in order to continue to fully invest all we can in each episode, we need your patronage. For more information, please go to patreon.com/above the basement.